The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood motionless in her private study, her fingers trembling as she held the official document that would change everything. The royal seal at the bottom seemed to mock her as tears threatened to spill from her emerald eyes. After 15 years of marriage, countless public appearances, and 3 beautiful children, this was how it would end, with legal papers and protocol. Prince William sat in his office across the courtyard, staring at an identical document. His usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the vulnerable man beneath the royal facade. The weight of duty had always been heavy on his shoulders, but this burden felt impossibly crushing. He thought about their first meeting at St. Andrews University, how Catherine had walked into that charity fashion show wearing a simple black dress, completely unaware that she was capturing the heart of a future king. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, sensing the gravity of the situation without fully understanding its scope. Mrs. Henderson, Catherine's longtime personal assistant, had noticed the Duchess spending more time alone in recent weeks, declining social engagements and canceling appearances that would typically energize her. The woman who had once brought such warmth and authenticity to the royal family seemed to be withdrawing into herself. In the children's wing of the palace, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis continued their morning routines, blissfully unaware that their world was about to shift dramatically. Their nanny, Maria, had been with the family since George's birth and had watched these 3 remarkable children grow under the loving guidance of their parents. She noticed the tension in the air, but attributed it to the usual pressures of royal life. The decision hadn't come suddenly. Catherine reflected on the months of private conversations, the attempts at counseling, and the growing distance that had developed between her and William despite their public displays of unity. The pressures of royal life, the constant scrutiny, and the weight of expectations had slowly eroded the foundation of their relationship. They had tried everything: private retreats, family therapy, even taking extended breaks from public duties. But some fractures run too deep to heal. William remembered the exact moment he realized their marriage was beyond saving. It was during a state dinner 3 months earlier when Catherine had looked at him across the room, and instead of the loving glance they usually shared, there was only profound sadness in her eyes. They had become strangers sharing a life, going through the motions of a fairy tale that had lost its magic. The media had begun to speculate about troubles within the royal marriage, but the palace's communications team had masterfully deflected such rumors. Royal correspondents noticed subtle changes: Catherine appearing at fewer joint engagements, William traveling alone to events they would typically attend together, and the absence of the spontaneous displays of affection that had always characterized their relationship. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, had sensed something was wrong during their last visit to Bucklebury. Her daughter, usually so vibrant and engaged with her grandchildren, seemed distracted and melancholy. Carol had tried to broach the subject gently, but Catherine had deflected with practiced royal diplomacy, insisting that everything was fine while her eyes told a different story. The Queen, now in her late 90s, had been briefed about the situation by William personally. Her Majesty, who had weathered her own family's marital storms over the decades, listened with the wisdom of someone who understood the unique challenges of maintaining a relationship under the intense pressure of royal duty. She offered her grandson guidance while respecting the difficult decision he and Catherine faced. Palace security had been discreetly increased, knowing that when news of the separation broke, it would create a media frenzy unlike anything since Diana's death. The communication strategy had been carefully planned, with statements prepared and key staff briefed on how to handle the inevitable questions that would come from press and public alike. Catherine thought about the thousands of letters she had received over the years from people who saw her as a role model, women who looked up to her marriage as proof that true love could survive anything. The guilt of disappointing these supporters weighed heavily on her conscience. She had always tried to be authentic while maintaining the dignity required of her position. But how do you authentically explain the end of what the world believed to be a perfect love story? The irony wasn't lost on either of them that their separation would be announced just months before their 15th wedding anniversary. William remembered writing his wedding vows, promising to love Catherine for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. They had weathered many storms together, but sometimes love isn't enough to overcome the fundamental incompatibilities that reveal themselves over time. Their friends from university days had watched the relationship evolve from young love to royal romance to what now seemed inevitable. Some had quietly suspected that the pressures would eventually take their toll, while others had genuinely believed that William and Catherine were strong enough to overcome any challenge. The truth, as it often is, was more complex than either extreme. As the morning progressed, both William and Catherine prepared for what would be one of the most difficult conversations of their lives. They needed to tell their children before the news became public, and they needed to decide how they would handle the logistics of their separation while maintaining some semblance of normalcy for George, Charlotte, and Louis. The palace gardens, where they had shared so many private family moments, seemed to hold echoes of happier times. Catherine could almost see her younger self chasing the children across the perfectly manicured lawns while William watched from the terrace, his face filled with contentment. Those memories felt like they belonged to different people now, a couple who had believed that love could conquer the unique challenges of their extraordinary circumstances. The weight of history pressed down on both of them as they contemplated their place in the long line of royal relationships that had faced similar challenges. They were not the first royal couple to struggle with the demands of duty versus personal happiness, and they likely wouldn't be the last. But that knowledge provided little comfort as they prepared to face their new reality. The afternoon air was crisp as William and Catherine walked through the private gardens of Kensington Palace, their children playing in the distance under the watchful eye of their protection officers. This had become their sanctuary over the years, the one place where they could attempt normal family life away from cameras and crowds. Today, however, the familiar paths felt different, charged with the electricity of unspoken decisions and impending change. Catherine had spent the morning calling her closest confidants, though she couldn't reveal the full truth yet. Her sister Pippa had sensed something significant in Catherine's voice during their brief conversation, noting an unusual formality that hadn't been present in years. The Duchess had mastered the art of maintaining composure while internal storms raged, a skill that had served her well throughout her royal tenure, but had perhaps contributed to the emotional distance that had grown between her and William. William found himself thinking about his mother, Diana, and the devastating impact her divorce from his father had on him, and Harry. He was determined that his children would not suffer the same trauma, even as he recognized that some pain was inevitable. The irony that he was now facing a similar situation to his parents wasn't lost on him, though the circumstances were vastly different. Where his parents' marriage had been marked by infidelity and public scandal, his and Catherine's was ending due to something far more subtle but equally destructive: the slow erosion of intimacy under the weight of expectation. The children's laughter echoed across the gardens as Prince George attempted to teach his younger siblings how to properly kick a football. At 11 years old, he had inherited his father's athletic coordination and competitive spirit, but also his mother's intuitive understanding of others' emotions. Catherine worried most about George, not because he was the eldest, but because he seemed to absorb the emotional undercurrents around him with startling accuracy. Princess Charlotte, now 9, was perhaps the most like her great-grandmother, the Queen, in temperament, observant, diplomatic, and possessing an innate understanding of social dynamics that sometimes surprised the adults around her. She had been asking why her parents seemed sadder lately, and Catherine had deflected with gentle reassurances that felt increasingly hollow. Children, Catherine had learned, are often more perceptive than adults give them credit for. 7-year-old Prince Louis remained blissfully unaware of the tension, his exuberant personality and infectious joy providing moments of lightness during an increasingly heavy time. He had his father's mischievous streak and his mother's warmth, and Catherine often found herself studying his carefree expressions, trying to memorize them before everything changed. The logistics of their separation had been discussed in clinical terms with teams of lawyers, communications experts, and senior palace officials. Joint custody arrangements, separate residences, coordinated schedules for royal duties. Everything was being planned with military precision. But beneath the practical arrangements lay the emotional reality that two people who had genuinely loved each other were preparing to dismantle a life they had built together. Catherine's role as a working member of the royal family would continue, but in a modified capacity. Her patronages, particularly those focused on children's mental health and early childhood development, remained close to her heart and provided a sense of purpose beyond her identity as William's wife. The work had always been more than duty to her. It was a calling that had helped her find her voice within the constraints of royal protocol. The staff at Kensington Palace had begun to notice subtle changes in routine. Separate cars for certain engagements, different schedules, and an unusual number of closed-door meetings with advisors. Royal households are notorious for their discretion, but they're also communities where people form genuine relationships over years of service. Many of the staff had watched William and Catherine's relationship develop from the early days of their courtship and felt a personal investment in their happiness. William had confided in his private secretary about the decision, needing someone to help coordinate the complex arrangements while maintaining absolute confidentiality. The man had served the royal family for over 2 decades and had witnessed various family crises, but he was struck by the maturity and mutual respect with which William and Catherine were handling their separation. The couple had agreed to maintain their joint charitable foundation, recognizing that their work together had created meaningful change in areas they both cared deeply about. Mental health initiatives, environmental conservation, and support for veterans would continue, though they would likely take on different roles within these efforts. Their shared commitment to service provided a foundation for cooperation even as their marriage ended. Media speculation had intensified in recent weeks, with royal correspondents noting the absence of the casual touches and shared glances that had always characterized William and Catherine's public appearances. Professional lip readers had been hired by tabloids to analyze their conversations during public events, searching for clues about potential marital strain. The palace's media team worked overtime to maintain the facade while preparing for the inevitable revelation. Catherine's personal protection officer, who had been with her for nearly 8 years, noticed changes in her demeanor during public engagements. Where she had once seemed energized by interactions with the public, there was now a subtle weariness that she couldn't entirely hide behind her practiced smile. The officer, trained to read body language and assess threats, could see the emotional toll the situation was taking on the Duchess. The Queen's weekly audience with William had taken on a different character in recent months. Her Majesty, with her decades of experience navigating royal crises, provided guidance while allowing her grandson the space to make his own decisions. She had learned from the tumultuous divorces of the 1990s that heavy-handed intervention often made situations worse, and she trusted William and Catherine to handle their separation with the dignity befitting their positions. Family traditions that had seemed unshakable were quietly being reevaluated. Christmas at Sandringham, Easter celebrations, summer holidays in Scotland, all would require new arrangements and careful coordination to ensure the children maintained stability. Both William and Catherine were determined that their personal situation wouldn't deprive their children of the royal experiences that were their birthright. The couple had begun the delicate process of explaining their decision to close family members. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, were devastated but supportive, recognizing that their daughter had made every possible effort to save her marriage. They worried about the media scrutiny that would inevitably intensify and the impact on their grandchildren, but they trusted Catherine's judgment and William's commitment to protecting the family. Private conversations with therapists had helped both William and Catherine understand that their separation wasn't a failure, but rather an acknowledgement that they had grown into different people with different needs. The couple who had fallen in love at university bore little resemblance to the individuals they had become under the pressure of royal duty and parenthood. Sometimes, the most loving thing two people can do is recognize when their paths need to diverge. As evening approached and the children were called in for dinner, William and Catherine walked slowly back toward the palace, knowing that these moments of relative normalcy were numbered. Soon, their private struggle would become public property, analyzed and dissected by millions of people around the world who felt they had a stake in the fairy tale that was ending. The decision had been made to tell the children on a quiet Sunday evening after their usual family dinner. William and Catherine had spent hours discussing how to approach this conversation, consulting with child psychologists, and drawing from their own painful memories of their parents' divorces. They agreed that honesty, age-appropriate explanations, and unwavering assurance of their love would be paramount. Catherine had prepared Prince George's favorite meal, hoping that familiar comforts might ease what was to come. As the family gathered around the dining table in their private apartment, the atmosphere felt both ordinary and momentous. The children chattered about their week, George's rugby practice, Charlotte's piano lesson, Louis's new fascination with dinosaurs, while their parents exchanged glances heavy with the weight of what they were about to share. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where so many family memories had been created. Photo albums scattered on coffee tables told the story of their life together: birthday parties, Christmas mornings, holiday adventures. William sat on one end of the sofa while Catherine chose the opposite end, unconsciously creating physical space that mirrored their emotional distance. "We need to talk to you about something important," William began, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. The children's expressions shifted from casual attention to concern as they recognized the serious tone their parents typically reserved for significant discussions. Catherine took over, her maternal instincts guiding her words. "You know how much we love all of you, and that will never, ever change. But sometimes, even when people love each other very much, they realize they need to live in different houses to be happy." Her voice remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for Charlotte's hand. The questions came slowly at first. Louis, at 7, was primarily concerned with practical matters. Would he still see both parents every day? Would they still go to Scotland in the summer? George, more mature and perceptive, asked quietly if they were getting divorced like his friend's parents had. Charlotte, ever the diplomat, wanted to know if she had done something wrong. William knelt in front of his children, his voice firm but gentle. "This has absolutely nothing to do with any of you. You are the best thing that has ever happened to both of us, and we will always be a family, just in a different way." He could see his mother's influence in how he approached this moment, the determination to protect his children from feeling responsible for adult decisions. The conversation continued for over an hour, with both parents answering questions with patient honesty while maintaining appropriate boundaries about adult concerns. They explained that Catherine would be moving to a new residence, but that both parents would be involved in daily life. School routines would remain the same, and important family traditions would continue, just with some modifications. Catherine watched her children process this information with a mixture of resilience and vulnerability that broke her heart. George, inheriting the stoicism that seemed bred into the Windsor bloodline, asked practical questions about logistics. Charlotte, true to her diplomatic nature, seemed most concerned about how this would affect family dynamics. Louis, still young enough to view the world with optimism, seemed relieved that he would still see both parents regularly. The following weeks were a carefully orchestrated ballet of transition. Catherine began spending time at several potential residences, ultimately choosing a property within walking distance of Kensington Palace that would allow the children to move easily between homes. The house was smaller than what she was accustomed to but offered the privacy and normalcy she craved. William threw himself into his royal duties with renewed intensity, perhaps using work as a coping mechanism for the emotional turmoil of dismantling his family life. His staff noticed longer hours, more attention to detail, and an almost compulsive need to stay busy. The prince, who had once been known for his work-life balance, seemed to be avoiding the quiet moments where reflection might prove too painful. The palace communications team worked around the clock to prepare for the public announcement. Focus groups had been conducted to test potential messaging. Legal experts had reviewed every word of the proposed statements, and contingency plans were developed for various scenarios of public reaction. The team understood that this announcement would dominate news cycles globally and wanted to maintain as much control over the narrative as possible. Catherine's private secretary had the delicate task of coordinating with various patronages and charitable organizations about the Duchess's future involvement. Many of these relationships had become deeply personal over the years, and Catherine was determined that her separation shouldn't negatively impact the causes she supported. Several organizations expressed their hope that she would continue her involvement regardless of her marital status. The children began to adapt to their new routine with the remarkable resilience that often characterizes young people facing family changes. Tuesday and Thursday evenings at Catherine's new home became anticipated events, with special activities and traditions being established. The new house had a larger garden than Kensington Palace, and Catherine found joy in planning landscaping projects with her children. William's relationship with his father had deepened during this period, as King Charles drew from his own experience with divorce to offer support and guidance. The king understood the unique pressures of maintaining royal duty while navigating personal crisis and had developed wisdom about protecting children during family upheaval. Their weekly lunches became more substantial conversations about fatherhood, duty, and personal happiness. The Queen, despite her advanced age, remained a source of strength and perspective for the family. Her Majesty had witnessed numerous family crises over her long reign and understood that the monarchy's survival often depended on handling personal challenges with dignity and minimal disruption to royal duties. She met individually with William and Catherine, offering her support while maintaining carefully neutral ground. Catherine's friendships outside the royal family became increasingly important during this transition period. Several women she had known since her university days provided emotional support and practical advice about single parenthood. These relationships, maintained despite the constraints of royal protocol, offered Catherine connection to her pre-royal identity and reminded her of who she was beyond her title. The couple began attending family therapy sessions with their children, recognizing that professional guidance could help everyone navigate the emotional complexities of their changing family structure. The therapist, vetted extensively by palace security and bound by extraordinary confidentiality agreements, helped establish communication patterns that would serve the family well in the years ahead. Media speculation reached a fever pitch as eagle-eyed royal correspondents noticed subtle changes in scheduling and public appearances. Tabloid headlines grew increasingly dramatic, though most were still operating under the assumption that any marital difficulties would be temporary. The palace's strategy of maintaining normal appearances while preparing for revelation required extraordinary coordination and discipline. Private moments between William and Catherine became increasingly rare and emotionally charged. Conversations that had once flowed naturally now required careful navigation of boundaries and sensitivities. They were learning to relate to each other as co-parents rather than spouses, a transition that proved more challenging than either had anticipated. The couple worked with child welfare experts to ensure that their separation would be handled in a way that prioritized their children's emotional well-being above all other considerations. Every decision, from living arrangements to holiday schedules, was evaluated through the lens of what would provide the most stability and security for George, Charlotte, and Louis. As autumn progressed, both William and Catherine felt a growing sense that they were living in a surreal interim period, no longer married in any meaningful sense, but not yet publicly separated. The weight of maintaining appearances while processing their own grief about the end of their marriage created an exhausting emotional burden that both struggled to bear with their characteristic grace. The morning of the announcement arrived with unseasonable warmth for late November. Catherine woke in her new residence for the first time, having officially moved the day before while the children were at school. The house felt simultaneously foreign and peaceful, representing both an ending and a beginning. Sunlight streamed through windows that she had chosen herself, onto furniture that reflected her personal taste rather than royal protocol. William sat in his study at Kensington Palace, reviewing the final draft of their joint statement one last time. Every word had been analyzed, debated, and refined to convey dignity, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment to their children and royal duties. The statement would be released simultaneously across all palace communication channels at precisely 10 a.m., giving the communications team time to manage the immediate media response. The children had been briefed that today would be different. They would stay home from school, and photographers would likely gather outside their usual locations. George, now fully aware of what was happening, had asked if he could read the statement before it was released. Both parents agreed, recognizing his maturity and his future role as heir. His only comment was to ensure that the statement made clear their family's unity despite the separation. Catherine's parents arrived early that morning, providing support and helping with the children while official business was conducted. Carol Middleton had become a master at reading public sentiment over the years and knew that her daughter would face intense scrutiny in the coming weeks. Michael Middleton, typically more reserved, expressed his pride in how Catherine had handled the situation with such grace. The palace staff had been briefed in small groups throughout the week, ensuring everyone who might field questions or interact with media had consistent information. Many longtime staff members were genuinely saddened by the news, having developed personal affection for the family over years of service. The housekeeper who had prepared countless family meals wiped away tears as she thought about how much the family dynamics would change. At precisely 10 a.m., the statement was released. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have made the difficult decision to separate after 15 years of marriage. This decision has been reached amicably and with deep consideration for their children, who remain their absolute priority. Both will continue their royal duties and joint charitable work, while establishing separate residences to better serve their evolving roles within the royal family. They request privacy during this transitional period, particularly for their children. Within minutes, the statement was trending globally on social media. News organizations interrupted regular programming to break the story, and royal correspondents who had been preparing for this possibility for months scrambled to provide analysis and context. The carefully neutral language of the statement frustrated media outlets hoping for more dramatic details, but reflected the couple's determination to control their narrative. The Queen released her own brief statement an hour later. Her Majesty supports the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge in their decision and has full confidence in their continued service to the Crown and their exemplary parenting of the future monarch and his siblings. The Queen's endorsement was crucial in establishing that this separation would not diminish either William or Catherine's standing within the royal family. Public reaction was swift and varied. Social media exploded with theories, condolences, and criticism. Many expressed genuine sadness at the end of what had seemed like a modern fairy tale, while others criticized the couple for failing to honor their marriage vows. Supporters praised their maturity in prioritizing their children's well-being, and royal watchers analyzed every detail of their recent public appearances for clues they might have missed. Catherine's first public appearance after the announcement was at a children's hospital where she had been patron for 7 years. The media presence was overwhelming, but her focus remained entirely on the young patients and their families. Photographers captured her natural warmth with the children, reinforcing the image of a woman whose dedication to her causes transcended her personal circumstances. William attended a veterans event the same day, maintaining his schedule despite the media frenzy surrounding the separation announcement. His composure was remarkable, though those who knew him well could see the strain in his eyes. He spoke passionately about support for former service members, channeling his emotional energy into causes that mattered to him. The children returned to school the following week with additional security measures in place. Their teachers had been briefed on the situation and provided with guidance on how to handle any questions or comments from other students. George, Charlotte, and Louis demonstrated remarkable resilience, though their protection officers noted increased attention from photographers near the school grounds. International media coverage varied significantly by country. Some outlets focused on the couple's commitment to co-parenting and continued service, while others sensationalized the story with speculation about causes and future romantic possibilities. The palace communications team worked overtime to correct misinformation and redirect attention toward the family's ongoing royal duties. Catherine's new household required entirely different staffing arrangements and security protocols. Her private secretary faced the challenge of establishing independent schedules while coordinating with William's office for joint family activities and official duties. The logistics of maintaining royal protocol while managing two separate households proved complex, but manageable with proper planning. The couple's joint charitable foundation issued its own statement emphasizing continuity in their shared work despite their personal separation. Major donors and partner organizations received personal calls from both William and Catherine, reassuring them that their commitment to the foundation's mission remained unwavering. Several long-term projects continued without interruption. Close friends of the couple found themselves in delicate positions, wanting to offer support while respecting boundaries and maintaining confidentiality. Many had suspected marital difficulties, but were surprised by the timing of the announcement. The couple's social circle gradually adjusted to new dynamics, with some friendships becoming individual relationships rather than couple-based ones. William's military colleagues and fellow veterans expressed their support privately, understanding the unique pressures he faced balancing royal duty with personal happiness. Many had witnessed firsthand how royal obligations could strain family relationships and respected his decision to prioritize his children's well-being over public expectations. The financial implications of the separation were handled with characteristic royal discretion. Settlements, property arrangements, and custody agreements were managed by teams of lawyers bound by extraordinary confidentiality agreements. Both William and Catherine were determined that financial matters wouldn't become public spectacle or sources of conflict. Catherine began establishing new routines and traditions in her independent residence, finding unexpected joy in simple freedoms like decorating according to her personal taste and entertaining friends without the complex protocols required at official royal residences. The smaller scale of her new life allowed for intimacy and spontaneity that had been difficult to achieve within the formal structure of palace life. Media analysis in the days following the announcement generally praised the couple's mature handling of their separation. Royal experts noted the contrast with previous royal divorces, particularly the dignity with which William and Catherine were managing their transition. Public opinion polls showed strong support for both individuals, even as many expressed disappointment about the end of their marriage. The announcement marked the end of one chapter in their lives, but also the beginning of new possibilities for both William and Catherine as individuals. They had successfully navigated one of the most challenging transitions a couple could face while maintaining their commitments to their children, their duties, and their shared values. The road ahead would bring new challenges, but they faced it with the strength they had always shown and the support of a nation that had watched them grow from university sweethearts into mature, responsible parents and public servants. 6 months after the announcement, William and Catherine had settled into a rhythm that surprised everyone with its functionality and grace. Their final goodbye hadn't been a dramatic scene of tears and accusations, but rather a quiet conversation in Catherine's garden on a spring evening, where they acknowledged what they had shared, what they had learned, and what they were grateful for despite the sadness of their ending. Catherine had discovered unexpected strength in her independence. Her new home had become a sanctuary where she could pursue interests that royal protocol had previously constrained. She had begun painting again, a passion from her university days that had been set aside during the demanding years of royal duty. Her art studio, converted from a spare bedroom, overlooked the garden where she and the children spent countless hours planting vegetables and flowers. The children had adapted with the remarkable resilience that characterized their generation. They moved seamlessly between their parents' homes, carrying backpacks filled with homework, sports equipment, and treasured possessions. Their parents' separation had become simply part of their reality, handled with the same matter-of-fact acceptance with which they approached their unique position as members of the royal family. William had thrown himself into his environmental work with renewed passion, finding purpose in causes that felt increasingly urgent as climate change dominated global conversations. His foundation had launched several major initiatives, and his ability to convene world leaders around environmental issues had only strengthened since the separation. Some observers noted that he seemed more focused and decisive in his public role. The media fascination with their separation had gradually diminished as both William and Catherine maintained dignity and refused to provide the drama that tabloids craved. Their consistent focus on their children and their work had eventually reduced coverage to the respectful level typically accorded to senior royals. Photographers still followed them, but the intensity had decreased significantly. Their co-parenting relationship had evolved into something that surprised both of them with its effectiveness. Weekly family dinners alternated between their residences, and they attended school events together without awkwardness. They had developed a business-like efficiency in their communications about the children while maintaining warmth in their interactions during family time. Catherine's role within the royal family had actually expanded in some ways since her separation. Without the constraints of always appearing as half of a couple, she had been able to develop her own distinct public identity more fully. Her work with early childhood development had gained international recognition, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences and symposiums worldwide. The Queen, now approaching her 100th birthday, had watched this transition with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed countless family challenges over her long reign. Her weekly audiences with William had evolved into conversations between two adults navigating complex responsibilities rather than grandmother giving advice to grandson. She expressed pride in how both William and Catherine had handled their separation with dignity. King Charles had found unexpected common ground with Catherine during this period, as they bonded over shared interests in organic farming and sustainable living. Their relationship, which had always been cordial but formal, had deepened into genuine friendship. Catherine's new independence had allowed her to relate to her former father-in-law as an individual rather than merely as her husband's parent. The children's relationship with their extended family remained strong and unchanged. Holidays with the Middleton grandparents continued as before, and royal family gatherings included Catherine when appropriate. The adults had successfully prevented their personal changes from disrupting the children's sense of security and belonging within both families. Catherine had begun dating quietly after the first year of separation, though she maintained strict privacy around these relationships. The media occasionally speculated about romantic possibilities, but her discretion and the palace's firm boundaries prevented such speculation from becoming intrusive. She was determined that any future relationship would develop naturally and privately. William's personal life remained largely private as well, though friends noted that he seemed more at peace with himself than he had in years. The pressure of maintaining a marriage that wasn't working had taken a greater toll than anyone had realized at the time. His renewed energy and engagement in his royal duties suggested that the separation, though painful, had been the right decision. Their joint charitable work had not only continued but had actually expanded in scope and impact. Freed from the need to coordinate every public appearance, they were able to pursue complementary but independent initiatives that played to each of their strengths. Their foundation had become one of the most effective charitable organizations in the Commonwealth. The public had largely come to accept and even admire how William and Catherine had handled their separation. Polls consistently showed high approval ratings for both individuals, and their approach to divorce had been studied by family counselors as an example of how to prioritize children's welfare during marital transitions. They had proved that modern royal relationships could end with dignity and mutual respect. Friends who had known them since their university days marveled at their maturity throughout the process. The young couple who had fallen in love over shared textbooks and late-night conversations had evolved into accomplished individuals who could navigate one of life's most challenging transitions while maintaining their responsibilities as parents and public figures. Their final goodbye had been remarkably free of bitterness or recrimination. Standing in Catherine's garden as their children played nearby, they had acknowledged that they had given everything to their marriage but had ultimately grown into people with different needs and dreams. They expressed gratitude for their children, for the experiences they had shared, and for what they had learned about themselves through their relationship. William had taken Catherine's hand as they talked, not romantically but with the affection of two people who had shared an extraordinary journey together. They agreed that their love had been real and meaningful, even though it had ultimately taken a different form than either had expected. They committed to always treating each other with respect and kindness, especially in front of their children. As the months passed, both had found unexpected gifts in their new lives. Catherine discovered interests and talents that had been dormant during her marriage, while William found freedom to pursue his environmental passions with single-minded focus. Their children continued to thrive, surrounded by love from both parents and extended family. The story that had begun as a fairy tale had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more authentic. Two people who had loved each other deeply had faced the reality that love sometimes means letting go, choosing growth over comfort, and prioritizing family harmony over public expectations. Their final goodbye had been the beginning of new chapters for both of them, written with the wisdom gained through shared experience and the hope that comes from choosing truth over pretense. The world had watched their love story unfold and had now witnessed its transformation into something different but equally admirable, a demonstration that even fairy tales can have multiple versions of happily ever after, and that sometimes the most loving thing two people can do is help each other become who they're meant to be, even if that means becoming those people apart.